It was here that we're putting in the launching ramp we have today. We poured it, and it was sticking up out of the ground by about 3 feet. So they brought a crane in, and it got away from them. The crane ran down into the water, in as far as the boom, and the boom still stuck out. So they wanted to know, would I go down and lift the crane up so that they could drag it up the launching ramp? Put my abalone mask on and go down under that crane. Got the cables pulled through, then I wanted to come back out, and the crane had settled in the sand and there was no way to get out. And then my hose came tight, the air compressor that we had sitting on another boat broke free, and it was heading down towards Stearns Wharf, so I had no air. Next thing I knew, I was in a black space, except my granddad was standing there. And then he looked up at the surface. I said, okay. Ended up on the surface right away. Why didn't I die? I don't know. My clothes were all torn up like they'd pulled me out from under the crane, but my skin was okay. And I was alive again, and thank God for that. I've been a Christian ever since.
This is from Hard Hat Divers Wear Dresses, which is written by Bob Kirby. And just that title alone gives you an idea of his sense of humor, right? As the years rolled along, I became a Navy diver, an abalone diver, a boat builder, a fisherman, an offshore welder, a construction diver, a machinist, a designer of diving helmets, an actor, and a manufacturer. He did everything. He had quite the career.
Bob Kirby was one of the most important divers in the history of commercial diving. It is his name that you'll probably see first on any piece of major diving equipment in the world.
I was working for the Fish and Game out of high school. One of their projects was counting abalone. So they had a diver and a boat, a fellow by the name of Glenn Bickford. They asked me to come down to Morro Bay and meet him. They took me out in the boat, dressed me in a heavy goo. Down I went, 30 feet of water. When the first time you go in the water, it takes your breath away. It's beautiful, especially when the helmet's half down and the water's right here, and as you go down, that's fun. I didn't see any abalones. I was so involved in the bottom and what's going on around me. I didn't have time to look at abalones. That was probably the beginning.
How did you start in your diving career?
I was a Navy diver. I'm a second-class diver. I went through a second-class diving school in Hawaii. Had the best time of my life. I got out of the Navy, went home, went out with a buddy of mine to drink some beer, and a girl came walking by, a beautiful figure. As she walked by, I said, come on over here and have a beer with me. She said, okay. After about 10 minutes, I said, I want to get married. She says, would you like to get married? She said, yes, I would. That evening, we made arrangements. The next day, we left to get married.
And still married?
Still married. Now, we only had one argument. It started on the day we got married. That's supposed to be funny. I bought a boat while I was in the Navy and rebuilt it with the idea of going out and diving for abalone. I did that. I took my new wife and we went out there, but she didn't like it at all. And I had problems with the boat. I was always mad because things were always going to break it. And I could see that this marriage was not going to survive. So we quit that and we went on Morro Bay and joined the Black Fleet. Really, they were a whole bunch of really good GIs, mostly of the Marines. Worked hard, knew no end to it. They weren't very good when it came to building things, so that was my department, so it all worked out. I'd help them and they'd help me. I was diving abalone in Morro Bay and I didn't like the place. The weather was bad. cold, windy, foggy. So I ran the boat down here and I put the boat up for sale. And then I found that I could rebuild some of these old masts and so forth for the abalone divers here.
Right around the 1950s, when abalone were booming, oil exploration started to parallel, and they were drilling for oil out here in California on the cliffs of Summerland. So they soon started offshore oil drilling, and they have to fix and maintain their equipment. So what better resource than having the local abalone divers who are used to working underwater?
It's the migration of this group of abalone divers into oilfield diving, which is the real big story. Then the success of oilfield diving expands.
Oil companies wanted to keep going deeper and deeper because the continental shelf in Santa Barbara, it's very close to shore, so the water gets deep real quick out here.
You can't breathe air over 200 feet before getting goofy. It's like being drunk.
When you get to that depth, beyond 132 feet, it becomes really, really toxic.
That doesn't happen when you breathe helium. Everybody understood at that point that if you're going to go deep, you had to go on helium.
So Wilson had a knowledge that with helium you could go really deep. And so he developed this helium demand system in an abalone helmet.
Danny Wilson was an abalone diver. Proved that it's going to work. He went out between the islands out here, made a dive to 400 feet, and it almost killed him.
He did what's called the bounce dive. Bounce dive means he just went down, touched bottom, and then came back up. The extreme pressure at 400 feet caused the gasket between the breastplate and the helmet to swell up, and it put a wedge lock on the helmet. Normally we can twist these things off, but because it swelled up so much and created this wedge effect, they could not get the helmet off. And his wife Dorothy was on the boat at the time and got extremely upset. So they had to go and take the actual breastplate and the brails off the helmet to get it off. It's very rudimentary, very seat of the pants. He could have killed himself, but that's what these guys did. They took risks back in the day.
After Dan Wilson died in 1962 and the development of commercial mixed gas pioneered here, then Associated needed to build equipment to be able to do helium diving, and Kirby was recruited to build that. He developed a commercial helium recirculator, which then went on to be basically his calling card for his career.
And in so doing, I changed a lot of designs around so I get better and better and better all the time. But then Associated went away, and I was stuck with nothing but my hand tools. So I rented a little shop at Santa Barbara Airport and started building helmets.
And so what he did was provide a supply of equipment where any of us, if you wanted to go deep and dive helium, Bob would sell you a helmet. There's a lot of people doing a lot of groundbreaking things, but he was the guy that was making the equipment. And when Bev comes along,
I saw Bev Morgan walking down the dock. I said, would you like a job? And he says, well, I can't. He says, I have to go get back on my abalone boat. I have a payment coming up on my house. And I said, well, how would $600 help? He says, for what? I says, for you to working for me for 6 weeks. But he was easy to work with, very, very intelligent and anxious to do good work.
they were very, very, very different, like a chalk and cheese type of different. Bob was very traditional. With Bev, his style of life was Ferraris, him and David Crosby doing all this crazy stuff.
The fact that Bob and Bev were both divers really gave them a supreme advantage in the industry.
Other people were trying to build diving helmets, but they weren't divers. And they could come up with dumb designs. For instance, when you put a diving helmet on, it's got to fit and it has to be comfortable. Now you say, well, it's not bad. There's a little screw right here, but I put my head against it once in a while, it's all right. Come 2 hours later, tell me about that screw.
They knew what divers needed and what worked and what wouldn't work for commercial divers.
The thing that turns is Bev's knowledge of laying fiberglass from his surfing days. We produced the helmet that changes the whole direction of everything, which is the Superlight 17.
So they introduced that and became basically an overnight success.
We were doing okay until we got a contract with the Navy. It was a fun contract, building 12 helmets, racy, good-looking helmets.
Operation Ivy Bells challenged the U.S. Navy to use top-of-the-line technology in order to wiretap underwater communication cables found within the USSR's territorial waters.
So they wanted a submarine that could sit down alongside that cable in 600 feet of water and have divers that are capable of going out and putting a listening device on this line. That program was alive and well up until 1980, and it was spooky work. We were in an old building we had, and we're just working away, and a guy pulls up with license plates, and he came in and he had on a single-piece suit, and he went right over to me and said, "Are you Bob Kirby?" I says, "I am." He said, "Get in my car and shut up." I got in his car and he said, "Now, Mr. Kirby, this is a super secret job that you're working. I'm here to tell you, if you tell anybody about this ever, you're a dead man. Now, Mr. Kirby, do you believe me?" "Yes, I sure do. You look like a spook to me." And I didn't tell anybody for over 30 years. The Cold War was over because they couldn't start anything that we didn't know about. So it was a good effort. And I was working for a company, WSM. He got a telephone call from Cameron, the director of the movie, The Abyss. Needed helmets built, and he was trying to get a hold of Bev Morgan to do it. He got a hold of Scott Millard, and Scott says, "You don't want Bev. He's hard to deal with." He said, "You need Bob Kirby." So they hired me to build about 12 helmets. They had to be movie actors' helmets. That meant that it had a great big viewports in the front and a light that would shine on the diver's face. I built the helmets, and I went back to where they're shooting this. I ended up doing some of the stunt diving. It came around to how are these movie actors going to be able to use this equipment? Well, that's easy. We'll just hire Bob. So I was there to train him hard. Keeping up with movie equipment people was tough. You had to be sharp and you had to move. And I found out with Jim Cameron, he never said no. He would ask you to do something that was just about impossible. And I always say, "Oh, sure, okay, Jim, sure. Have a cup of coffee and I'm gonna think about it. And in 10 minutes, I'm gonna come back and give me my answer." In 10 minutes time, it gave me time to figure out how I was gonna do it. It gave him time to cool off. I enjoyed the movie work.
Bob was a diver's diver. He was a consummate joker. He would always be pulling practical jokes, and he always had that sparkle in his eye.
Bob was everybody's mate to a degree, a really open-hearted, kind guy.
He gave back. He loved to impart his knowledge and his experiences with other people, primarily young people. He was a teacher at heart.
It's like starting up a basketball game and Michael Jordan turns up. That's how it was with Kirby.
When I was 19 years old and we went to Diving Systems International's booth, stars in our eyes, and well, gosh, we're going to be a commercial diver. Bob Kirby and Bev Morgan were the only two people that would talk to us. They knew that we were the future.
They really changed the world. They got us to new places, and they revolutionized that diving industry, and we'll miss them.
How did we pull this off? Well, we're old abalone divers. Bob Radcliffe, Murray Black, Jerry Todd, all the old timers, all the Black Fleet are all abalone divers. So what makes them so special? They're just guys, right? Well, yes and no. Most of them are Marines, been shot up a little bit, knew how to shoot back. They knew how to organize. They knew how to deal with people, how to go in the bar and get your tender out of the bar and keep him sober enough that he could work the next day. Everything that you did in the abalone business was a test to see if you could survive. It was always cold and miserable and wet, and the boat was broken down, or you had a big swell. There was always a reason why it was hard to get the abalone. These old GIs had what it took to do it. And then when I got out in the business world, they survived.